so much for coming. My name is Bridget Schulte. I'm a writer, and I'm also the director of the Better Life Lab. And welcome to our event called Your Work May Be Killing You. Does that sound familiar to any of you? Yeah, you might notice I have a little bit of a cold. I do blame this on my lovely son who just came home from college for spring break, but also something to do with the fact that I've probably been working a little bit too much. To be perfectly honest, yes. So we're delighted to have you here. We are going to have a fantastic panel discussion. We're going to talk a little bit amongst ourselves here, and then we'll open it up for questions. So let me just start by briefly introducing everyone, and then we'll get started. So right here, directly to my right, we've got Amit Bhatia. He is the co-founder of a fascinating startup called TapWage. I'm going to let him talk about it. But the reason that I asked him to be on the panel, I was looking for somebody who was sort of like, I won't say a workaholic, but somebody, and I was actually going to introduce myself, like my name is Bridget, I'm a recovering workaholic. But I was looking for, say, someone like, here we're going to be in New York and Wall Street, and you know, people die, they work so much on Wall Street, and what's Wall Street like? And so I was looking on all these different forums, and I went to Quora, and I found this like beautiful, philosophical like discussion of what it was like to work on Wall Street, and so that's why I have Amit here. Also worked on Wall Street, but no longer does, but can tell us about that and sort of the pluses and minuses. And then next to him, we've got Lee Stringer. Lee is an architect, and she wrote a fantastic book called The Healthy Workplace, How to Improve the Well-Being of Your Employees and Boost Your Company's Bottom Line, which is so much fun because she opens where she's like in the Johnson & Johnson like space pod, corporate athlete, I don't know, getting a massage. It sounded fantastic. So, and then next to Lee, we've got Matt Darling. He is the Vice President of Ideas 42. And Ideas 42, we're here in partnership with Ideas 42 and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. I want to thank them very much. This whole project off the ground. So Matt's going to be talking about some of the research that they've been doing, really looking at work-life conflict and overwork and the impact on health. Really looking at through the fascinating lens of behavioral science, really for using human psychology to try to understand what drives that overwork individually, at the team and organizational level, and also culturally, and then what can we do about it? So looking forward to that. And next to Matt, we've got Barbara Wankoff, who is just an absolute expert in this field. I'm delighted that she's here. I'm delighted that you all are here. Barbara is the Executive Director of Diversity and Inclusion at KPMG and has been working on these issues for quite some time. And then finally, we've got Sarita Gupta. She is the Executive Director of Jobs with Justice and also the Co-Director of Caring Across Generations. So we're going to start. Let me start with Lee. So, you know, the title of the show is Your Work May Be Killing You. And I actually have to say I sort of stole that from Jeff Pfeffer. He's a professor at Stanford, and he's actually working on a book called Your Paycheck May Be Killing You, so I sort of changed it a little bit. But he and his research partners have done some really interesting looking at 228 different studies looking at work culture and health. And what they've found is that a combination of erratic schedules and uncertainty for low-wage workers, and long work hours and sort of telepressure and always feeling like you have to be on and vigilance for knowledge workers, that it's making us sick, that the workplace itself is now the 5th leading cause of death in the United States, responsible for 120,000 excess deaths a year, with healthcare costs that rival diabetes. So what I want to know is why aren't we talking about this more? So Lee, give us an overview. You looked at the healthy workplace. It doesn't seem like it's that healthy. What's going on?
Well, just a little context. A couple of years ago, around about the time that I met you, Bridget, I was going through a bit of a crisis. I work for an architecture firm, and it was a really, really stressful time. And the first time in my life, I've always been able to rally, you know, when times get tough. I hit a wall. So working on a huge project, 80 hours a week for, you know, weeks and weeks and weeks on end. And we all got there every once in a while. But in my case, my family was not so happy with me or my friends, all of that, and started this journey where I was really said, there's got to be a better way, got to be a better way to work. And so I interviewed paleoanthropologists, and I kind of went way, way back. I decided, rather than look at work just the last 100 years, let's go way, way back and really understand how our health is so impacted. I mean, times are good. We have food. We have grocery stores. Like, why is it so difficult? Why is our life so difficult? So was just, looking maybe 2 million years back, is that a lot of our time was spent hunting and gathering, and as you might expect. But when I talked to these paleoanthropologists, they said that we actually were walking 8 or 9 miles a day. We were moving constantly. Of course, you're always, being chased by a saber-toothed tiger and all these sorts of things. But we're moving, and our diet obviously evolved quite a bit. But fast forward to the farming, when we all kind of cities were evolved, like maybe 10,000 years ago. It happened all over the world around the same time due to global warming and lots of reasons. But we were still, even when we were farmers, we were moving around quite a bit. And if you look at subsistence farming, a lot of Amish farmers today and things like that, they're still moving 7, 8 miles a day and eating fairly nutritious meals. And then, kind of the Industrial Revolution hits, we move inside. The physical workplace itself gets pretty horrible. As we all know, we're working crazy hours. Time shifted quite a bit, and a very, very kind of stressful environment. There was this great story I heard in Manchester where it was so awful that there was this thing called Gen carts, and people would be given Gen, or they could buy Gen on the street. They could even buy it on the factory floor. So we spent most of our time intoxicated while working, which maybe that's good. I don't know. Now we're not intoxicated. Now we have coffee. It's so much better. So there's that. And so this kind of slow, gradual evolution. And I think now we're in a position where a lot of us are very addicted to our devices. We're working much more than those 40 hours that we all work so hard to reduce the work week down into. And we're giving away a lot of extra hours are not paid. Something like 30 extra plus hours a week, working desperately in grocery stores or in our pillows, on our iPhones, whatever the case may be. And it's caused not only, physical issues, musculoskeletal issues with our working, and the fact that we're not moving very much. We're not getting in our 150 minutes a week, which the American Medical Association requires. How many of you guys work out 150 minutes a week? That's like 5 times 30 minutes a week. Okay, so that was maybe like 30% of you. Okay, you represent the population. That's great. So what does this mean? Well, obviously there are all kinds of issues with obesity and being overweight. 2/3 of our country is overweight. It's a huge issue, and it's causing all these chronic issues and diseases. And it's also, we're really stressed out. There's this heart-mind, health condition or connection. And so we're spending a lot of our time really stressed, and we have all kinds of issues physically with absenteeism, but also with presenteeism, which is going to work and kind of not really being into it, which is causing something like $500 billion a year to lost profitability in organizations. And there's also this interesting rift I've been noticing in the last few years, which is there are people who are employed, luckily, and working, and their employer is not willing to maybe hire another person to fill that position, right? So we're continuing to hold on to the jobs we have. We were talking about this earlier. And then there's a whole swath of the population that is desperate to be working, period, to be working any sort of hours. And so there's a systemic issue, I think, that we're wrestling with. But at the end of the day, I think there's some lights of hope, and we can talk about those during our discussion today. But I think a lot of it starts with leaders who recognize it in themselves. You mentioned the Human Performance Institute. I spent some time with, how many of you guys have heard of HPI? So the Human Performance Institute trains athletes to improve their performance and better their game. They train Olympians and all kinds of elite athletes. And over 30 years, they've been training them to really manage their energy over time. Over the course of a day and between matches, it's all about managing energy. That is the difference between the A and the A+ players. So now they're training corporate America, and they're specifically training leaders in corporate America to help manage their energy and recognize there's a life outside of work, that life and work overlap and feed each other. And so it's a pretty exciting time, I think, as we build that realization, but it starts a lot with leadership.
You know, well, thanks so much, Lee. What I'd like to do is, if I could turn to you, Amit. One of the things that you know that really strikes me. You talk about presenteeism, and if you look at, say, Gallup, they do this general poll pretty much every year of employee engagement, and something like over 70% of American workers are disengaged at work, and yet we put in these really long hours. If you look internationally, we work longer hours than about any other advanced economy except for Japan and South Korea. And there's a word for dying at your desk in Japanese, you know. So speaking of, at this point, let me turn to you, Amit. You know, you worked in Wall Street where, you know, in that investment banking environment where those kind of long hours are sort of seen as this badge of honor or almost like boot camp that you have to get through. Can you talk about what that was like? And I think the most important question that I want to ask is, do you really have to work that way in order to do good work?
Solve the world's problems for
No, you don't have to work to do good work. I think that's obvious. But there's certain industries we probably can't fix, and Wall Street's one of them, because when you come in young, you opt into that career, you get a lot of money, you're working on a deal that's, you know, someone's life-changing event, and they're paying you millions of dollars to work on it. I'm sorry, they're paying you millions of dollars to work on it, and they want you to be available. If they want to talk on a Saturday night, you're going to be available to talk on a Saturday night. So that's not, but what I found jarring is actually when I left that and I came to tech, and the attitude is still the same, and it's not millions of dollars, and it's not as critical. And I mean, even banking isn't critical. It's not medicine. You're not saving lives. So you don't have to work this way. But the flip side I'll bring up is, it's not the hours that get to you. It's the unpredictability that gets to you. If you know you have to work 15 hours a day every day, you'll probably get used to it over time, and you'll find your zone of happiness, and you'll make your schedule around it. What I hated in banking was you'd sit down at dinner with my wife on Friday night, and you'd get an email, and you'd be at this fancy restaurant, you'd be like, okay, I gotta go. Or you'd get on a plane, and you'd cancel your trip, you'd fly back the next day, and you'd cancel your vacation. And I think when the big banks, they started 2 years ago, they started thinking about how do we deal with work-life balance. The first thing they did was they said, let's reduce the hours. And they realized that morale didn't go up at all. But then they started giving you protected time off. So you still worked long hours, but they guaranteed you every second Saturday you could make plans. And morale went up.
How about every Saturday?
Every second Saturday.
Well,
What happened to the weekend?
But it's a trade-off. It's a small, even within Wall Street, it's a small group of people that opt into it. You do it for 3 or 4 years, and hopefully it gets better. The problem is, after 3 or 4 years, nobody tells you you can stop doing this now, and you've got to start drawing your own boundaries.
You know, Barbara, I'd like to, you know, bring you into this at this point. One of the points that you made earlier when we were talking was that sometimes, especially when it comes to knowledge work, people are really passionate about what they do, and maybe they weren't passionate about the deal, but it was sort of that kind of all-encompassing, exciting environment, or we're really passionate. You know, how do you set boundaries so that you don't go from passion to like burnout?
Well, some similar challenges in the professional services firm as in banking, but a few really key differences. And we do have people who we say they have opted into this, and they know that it's going to be hard work. It's client service delivery. So again, clients says jump, we say how high. But our engagement scores are through the roof, actually. And we, 2 years ago, set out on something that we call to talk about purpose. And we really helped our employees from a very grassroots and leadership standpoint. So bottom up, top down, is help people recognize why they're doing the work they're doing. And we told some stories of KPMG's history and the things that we've been involved in, really world-changing events over time in our long history. And then we challenged our employees to tell us why they were working, so that they weren't just doing an audit of a healthcare company, but they were finding extra money that the healthcare company could dedicate to cancer research. So they would tell us that they're helping to cure cancer. And it framed their work in a completely different way. Now, we set out a challenge to our employees and said, if we could get 10,000 stories in a 3-month period of time, and at that point in time, we had about 24,000 employees. So we were asking for 1 story per person, you know, from less than half of our population. But we set out a challenge that if we could get 10,000 stories in 3 months, we would give extra days off over the Christmas holiday period. Well, in less than a month, we had 10,000 stories. And we announced that, congratulations, you'll get extra time off. And we proceeded to get an additional 35,000 stories from our employees. This resonated so much, and it gave people that purpose to do the work they're doing. So all in all, now you want to do the work, you believe in it, and you tend to put in a lot of extra effort and a lot of extra hours. So how do you find that balance of doing important work that you believe in and you want to excel at, to not being sidelined and not doing meaningful work? And where's that sweet spot? And I do think it is a lot about self-regulation. And I also think that it is about leadership and being sure that our leaders understand the importance of that time to recharge, which is why that we shut down over the holiday break so that there's no work happening. You don't come back to thousands or hundreds of emails and then have to work so much the week before you go out and the week after you come back. You get 10 or 12 days where there's no email traffic, there's no expectation to be online, and you do get that. I would love to say we could do that every weekend, but we're not quite there yet. But I think that there's recognition and discussion of the benefit that we see in our employees to giving them at least some time to really recharge. So, small steps.
Yeah, well, so Rita, I'm going to get to you in a minute, but Matt, let me bring you in at this point. So,
Self-regulation, and a lot of behavior
science is really looking at, how we make decisions and the decisions that we make. But, is there something, when you're looking at the workplace and the work context, is it only self-regulation? Is it also looking at systems and structures? And what can behavioral science kind of help us understand in terms of both the problem and the solutions here?
Can I borrow a mic? I think mine ran out of battery. Sorry. Speaking of getting depleted. But yeah, I think it's interesting. So, I work at Ideas for Two, which is a behavioral design firm, and we're a nonprofit. I think it's a great place to work. I think it's a place where we have a lot of flexibility, a lot of ability to set our own hours. I'll brag to my colleagues who are here in the New York office because I'm in the Boston office where there's only 6 of us, and so no one even knows if I come in, so maybe I don't. And what's funny about this is you think about this like from that perspective, like the systems are in place, the leadership that's bought in, and everyone thinks that work-life balance is important, especially on the work-life balance team. And what's fascinating is I still think my work-life balance is pretty bad. Right, I think all the structures and leadership and a lot of these impediments that we're really worried about are really bad. And my work-life balance isn't great, and part of it's because like you said, I value my work. I think it's important. I like doing it, but also, and I think this is where the behavioral science comes in, is because there's a lot of ways that I make mistakes and how I prioritize or how I self-regulate. So you think about how do how do I set the work that I want to do? So I like the part of my work that I'm doing the fun, creative side of it, but that doesn't mean that I don't have to go and spend an afternoon every once in a while, figuring out where my invoices are going and where they're supposed to go and what the actual charges are. And what's always interesting is I kind of like put that off, right? So I start out and say, hey, here's the creative work. And then I say, okay, now I need to do the invoices. But I'm like, but really I should go and answer this other email, and maybe I should, reorganize my whole email system because I just don't really want to do those invoices. And I procrastinate on that, and I'm like, oh wait, I really should get paid for some of my work sometimes. So one of the things that we've been thinking about a lot is these sorts of ways that are, how we procrastinate, how we forget, all these sort of funny little quirks of how people make decisions, how people take action, and how that really interacts with workplace design and how we work things out. And I'm thinking about almost like the Robert Mending Wall poem of good fences make good neighbors, and then the neighbor comes and says, yeah, okay, but that's only when there are cows, right? If cows aren't going to go and eat your grass, it's fine. And a lot of ways we workplace is structured sometimes is saying, aha, keep an eye on your workers. They're going to go and try and slack off, and they're going to try and get as much as they can. And a lot of times that's not the case. A lot of times we're the ones who are driving ourselves. We're the ones that are motivating ourselves. And when you put in these structures, it removes that motivation. Going back to your point about people being disengaged or people being uncomfortable. So I think thinking about how these sorts of weird things about how people act changes. And I think one thing that's really clear to me is that even it's not about knowing it. I've realized these things about myself. I've realized these mistakes that I make. But how can we change the structure of how we're organized in order to make it better? And I would love to say I have a good answer to that. We're working on that right now. We've got some ideas. I think everyone has the wonderful toolkit that Bridget and my colleague Stanley Wehan have put together. And I think these are good ideas. But I think the question is, do they work? And that's the thing that we're going to hope to find out.
It's interesting. Sarita, now let me bring you in, because one of the things Matt was talking about was that sense of, self-will or whatever. But what if you're a low-wage worker, and you are completely at the sort of the mercy of your bosses, the organization, and just like Matt was saying, a lot of the structures are set up because there isn't a sense of trust, or we're going to watch you, or we think you're going to try to get away with something, so almost very punitive. Can you talk more about sort of what a low-wage worker or an hourly worker might feel, what the situation is for them, and and how does that impact health? Is there, have you looked at what that experience is like?
Yeah, thank you. Wow. Well, work is stressful, as we know, and this conversation is absolutely credentialing that it's a public health crisis, really. And the truth is that the intensity of stress that's faced by workers who in the low-wage sectors of our economy is incredibly intense. And it's not talked about, but it's so stressful. And then the health implications, both physical and mental health implications, are enormous. So the best way, I would love to just share a story of a woman named Janelle. She's a home care worker, and she's a warehouse worker, and I'm actually going to quote her. This is pretty much how my day goes. I get up, and I get my daughter to school by 8 a.m. I'm at my first job by 9 a.m. I get off at 1 p.m. and try to take a nap before I pick up my daughter at 5:30 p.m. We do dinner and homework. I try to take another nap. Then I go to work at my second job at 10 p.m. in a warehouse because I'm not getting the hours with home care. And if I do get the hours, it's still not enough money. I make it home by 7 a.m. and start over. Some days I'm going off of 3 or 4 hours of sleep. On Saturday, sometimes I get to sleep late. And sometimes I'll get up and try to go do a movie with my daughter. But if I do that, a bill doesn't get paid. Like, that is the reality that growing numbers of working women and men in our economy are facing. right now. And I say that because imagine functioning on 3 or 4 hours of sleep every day. Over time, what that does to your physical and mental health. So it's really pretty profound. And what we found in our work is that it doesn't have to be this way. So we've looked a lot at the retail and restaurant sector, for example, which are 2 growing sectors of our economy. And what we found is for restaurant or retail workers, the chaotic schedules and unpredictable schedules, coupled with the lack of enough hours of work, coupled with the low wages, is tremendously stressful. So today in the retail sector, a lot of employers are going towards sort of what we call having workers on call, right? And in demanding that people have open availability, which means essentially you call, in some cases you call in the morning and hope you have a job that day and you have some hours of work, or you're just on call until the employer calls you, and you're expected to be on call and open and available full time, even though the work you'll be asked to come in for is just part-time, which then if you think that through for a second, how does somebody hold a second job or a third job because they're not actually being given the flexibility or told here are some hours within which you're going to work? So many working women and men that we've talked to have said this is impossible. To budget their lives, to plan their lives, to take care of themselves, to go to doctor's appointments, let alone if you have children or you have aging adults in your family that you care for, how you actually plan for their needs.